Everybody ready? Good afternoon. I'm joined here today by Chief Kelly Warner of the Harrisonburg, Virginia Police Department, and you all know Major Ed O'Carroll, who's the Bureau Chief of our Major Crimes Bureau. We're here today to talk about a serial killer, and that is the phrase that I've used sparingly in my 3 decades in this profession. I've been in a leadership role for the last decade or so at several departments in the National Capital Region and the DMV, and I can count on one hand with a couple fingers left over the number of times where law enforcement has had to grapple with the impact of a serial killer. We have a serial killer. The good thing is he's in custody. The challenge that remains is identifying other victims, and we're going to talk about that at great length. Our serial killer is called the shopping cart killer. He's called the shopping cart killer because he meets his victims, and so far we have 4. 2 are positively identified, 1 is tentatively identified, and 1 is unknown. He meets his victims on dating sites. He meets his victims then at motels, and we'll talk about a motel that he met 2 of his victims at here in Fairfax County. Chief Warner will go into the motel down in Harrisonburg where he met and killed 2 of his victims. After he inflicts trauma to his victims and kills them, he transports their bodies to their final resting place, literally in a shopping cart. And there's video to that effect. So our shopping cart killer, we know, has traveled from the DMV all the way down to Harrisonburg. We're in the process of conducting, along with many other partners, a retrospective investigation to figure out where he's been. We're going to find out exactly where he's been, and we're going to work with our law enforcement partners, homicide detectives, missing person detectives, to see if we can identify any other victims and families and communities that he has brought harm to. The 2 victims in Harrisonburg, females, one's 54, one's 34. The known suspected victim here in Fairfax is 29 years old. I want to thank Chief Rob Conti from the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. When we start talking about these cases, you'll quickly remember the name Cheyenne Brown. Cheyenne Brown is who we tentatively believe one of our victims located here in Fairfax County is. We don't have 100% positive identification on her just yet, but we have a tattoo that's been positively identified by her family as Cheyenne's tattoo. And the reason why we're not waiting to share this information, waiting that is until we get positive 100% DNA or dental verification that it is Cheyenne, is because we believe that there may be other victims in the area and throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we need to act now. We need to act right now with our law enforcement partners to figure out who else our killer has had contact with and what's his MO. Dating sites, motels, blunt force trauma, shopping cart, final resting place. He's killed 4 already, and we suspect that he has more victims. He's a predator, as all serial killers are, and it's our collective effort in law enforcement to do everything we can with each other, with the community, to identify other places where he has been so we can bring closure and ultimately justice. He preys on the weak, he preys on the vulnerable, and he does unspeakable things with his victim. Our shopping cart killer does unspeakable things with his victims. And it's our collective duty and responsibility to bring justice and closure to all of our communities. I think I'm going to introduce first Chief Kelly Warner, again from the Harrisonburg Police Department. She's been a great partner, as has her entire police department. And then Chief Warner will bring up Major O'Carroll. Chief.
Good afternoon, everyone. I join Chief Davis in sending our condolences to all the victims' families in this tragedy that happened across the Commonwealth of Virginia. On November 23rd, 2021, Harrisonburg Police Department identified 2 female victims that were found dead in an open lot in a commercial district of the city of Harrisonburg. Anthony Robinson, age 35, was arrested as a result of video surveillance and cell phone records that connected him to two victims. The first victim, as Chief Davis mentioned, was Elizabeth Redmond, age 54, of Harrisonburg, and Tanita Laree Smith, age 39, of Charlottesville. Harrisonburg Police Department and Charlottesville Police Department were conducting two separate missing persons investigations, which resulted in narrowing the focus to search this open lot. Both women were discovered within a short distance of each other, dead, although their deaths took place at two separate times. On November 30th, 2020, Metropolitan PD contacted the Harrisonburg Major Crimes Division and noted that the last known person that a missing person that they were investigating had contact with Robinson. It was a result of that information, HPD Major Crimes was able to determine that through cell phone records, that contact took place in and around the area of the Moon Inn on Richmond Highway in Alexandria. Then we received contact from Fairfax Police Department, and Major O'Carroll's team contacted us. And so then we began this coordinated effort to track down more victims, unfortunately, that were at the hands of this shopping cart killer, Mr. Robinson. So now I'd like to introduce Major O'Carroll.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. As introduced, I'm Major Ed O'Carroll. I have the pleasure of heading the Fairfax County Police Department's Major Crimes, Cyber, and Forensics Bureau. 10 days ago, on December 7th, detectives from the Fairfax County, Virginia Police Department received a call for assistance from the Metropolitan Washington, D.C. Police Department for help in locating a missing female. My team immediately pulled resources together to aid in the search. Detectives were informed that Ms. Cheyenne Brown, 29, of Washington, D.C., took the Metro from Washington, D.C. to the Huntington Metro stop on September 30th and never returned. Digital data showed that Ms. Brown was in the 6100 block of Richmond Highway, possibly at the Moon Inn on the night of her disappearance. Homicide detectives, with assistance of a cadaver dog from the George Mason University Police Department, responded to the Moon Inn in that immediate area and conducted a search. Unfortunately, we were unable to locate Miss Brown or any evidence relevant to her whereabouts. My team traveled to Harrisonburg to meet the chief and her detective team and to gather additional intelligence about the link between Miss Brown and our suspect and the nexus to Fairfax County. Detectives from my homicide squad coordinated with the Metro Transit Police Department and actually located video surveillance of Miss Brown at the Huntington Metro stop on September 30th. We authored a search warrant, executed for cellular data, and we received it immediately, confirming that Miss Brown and the suspect were at the same location on September 30th, the night of her disappearance. Video surveillance confirms that the victim and the suspect were together in Washington, D.C. at the same Metro stop on that fateful night. This past Wednesday morning, new information was provided that took my detectives back to the area of the Moon Inn to expand their original search. Wednesday afternoon, just 2 days ago on December 15th, homicide detectives found what had caught their eye, which is in the wooded area just off Route 1 of an item that required a little bit more of investigative research. Remembering that the victims in the Harrisonburg murders were transported by using a shopping cart, detectives observed a shopping cart in the wooded area, not far from the Moon Inn. Besides the shopping cart was a lone container. When detectives looked inside the lone container, their worst fears were confirmed. They observed what appeared to be human remains. We contacted the Office of the Medical Examiner. They responded, along with an anthropologist from the George Mason University, Dr. Falsetti. And thank you to the doctor and the team. The initial analysis done on the scene confirmed what we thought. Likely human remains were inside. Through a coordinated effort between the Fairfax County Police Department, Harrisonburg, the Metropolitan Police Department, detectives tentatively believe the remains discovered in the container are that of Miss Brown. As the Chief Davis mentioned, the tentative identification is based upon a very distinct tattoo that Miss Brown had on her body. We are working with the Department of Forensic Science and further DNA testing to positively and scientifically confirm her identity. Sadly, these remains were not alone in the container. The remains of another unknown identified individual were discovered. Detectives have been working nonstop on this case since being notified of Miss Brown's disappearance in Fairfax County. We have determined that the suspect in custody in Harrisonburg was communicating with Miss Brown, utilizing a dating website. Detectives are hoping that further examination of these records that we have and more that are coming will provide additional information on who the second victim is. We have a lot of work to do. While the investigation, the multi-jurisdictional investigation, is still young, and we are in the early stages, detectives believe that the deaths were at the hand of the serial killer. The suspect, thankfully in custody at the Rockingham County, Virginia jail. And again, we believe him to be involved in the death of these two additional innocent victims. Special thanks to the detective team, the lead detective, Detective Young, her squad, to our crime scene unit, all our staff, sworn and professional, and to our victim services. Thank you. It's a team effort. There may be other victims in this case, and we are asking for anyone with additional information to come forward. Call the Fairfax County Police Department Major Crimes Bureau at 703-246-7800. Tips can also be submitted anonymously through our Crime Solvers program, and that phone number is 1-866-411-TIPS. That's 1-866-411-TIPS. Again, anonymous tipsters can make that call, and there is a reward program for information that leads to charges. So my remarks in closing is not to the suspect, and it's not to my team. It's to the impacted families. I'm sorry. My deepest condolences. This police department, the Harrisonburg Police Department, all the agencies mentioned are absolutely committed. Justice will prevail, and the offender will be held accountable for what he did. And we haven't ruled out they, I'll use the plural term, maybe what they did, how he or they did it. Thank you.
Sam.
So are we to presume that perhaps this fourth victim is somebody from this area, because you say the remains were found in the same container?
So, Sam, we have not positively identified the fourth victim, but we have leads that will hopefully, in short order, help us identify this unidentified person. We do have leads on who it may be. The state of decomposition was so bad that it's going to take a little bit of work, but we have leads about a missing person in particular in the area, last seen in the area, that we're following very closely.
In this area?
last seen in this area.
Steve,
Bruce?
as I understand it, Ms. Brown was 4 months pregnant. Does Virginia law allow you to charge for the death of that baby?
Yeah, so I've spoken with the Office of the Commonwealth Attorney. I've spoken with the Commonwealth Attorney. He's aware of this case. He was when it first came to light. And then, to our surprise, we have 2 victims, not 1. That's something that's part of the investigation. And we haven't ruled anything out on potential charges for the person or persons responsible for the deaths. As I said in my comments, and I'll emphasize them because they're important. Justice will prevail.
One, two.
Two quick questions. Has the suspect been cooperating at all, acknowledging any of these crimes? And then secondarily, is there DNA evidence to tie him to 1, 2, or more of these crimes?
I'll ask Chief Warner to speak about the degree of cooperation. We certainly don't want to compromise the integrity of Chief Warner's investigation or our pending investigation, but I'll let the Chief address that. And DNA forensic evidence is always something that we're seeking. As we mentioned, the state of decomposition for the 2 victims found here in Fairfax County was so bad that it's going to take a little while to get 100% certain identification, but we have every reason to believe that Cheyenne Brown is one of the 2 persons in that container.
And there's physical evidence as well to tie him to each scene or to all the cases?
There's certainly a mounting evidence that puts our killer right here in Fairfax County, just like he was placed right there in Harrisonburg. So, Chief, do you want to add to that?
Regarding up here, yes, to the physical evidence, we're collecting physical evidence, of course, to echo Chief Davis. Certainly, we're collecting all of that for DNA, and so we're going to hone in on that for certain. And regarding his cooperation, he does have an attorney, so we have not had a statement from him, so no.
Chief Davis, 2 quick questions. Have you guys been in contact with any federal law enforcement assisting you guys as of right now in the investigation?
Again, I don't mean to punt back, but I'll ask Chief Warner to describe some outreach that she's already had with Quantico. And then I'll reiterate, we are going to engage in a very thorough retrospective examination. We're working backwards right now. So thankfully, Anthony Robinson is in custody. We believe he's responsible for these 4 deaths. But what else is he responsible for? We know that he has had addresses as far north as New York, to Prince George's County, to Washington, D.C., and we know he's obviously traveled all the way down to Harrisonburg. But where else has he been? Where else has he laid his head? Where else has he worked? Who does he know in all the jurisdictions in between? So it's going to be a real thoughtful, thorough effort, because we need to work, again, with the jurisdictions to see if any of their missing persons meets the profile that we're establishing here for our killer's profile, and NO and all those types of things.
And a quick follow-up, you mentioned that they were meeting at a hotel and had met, or at different hotels and met dating apps. Do you believe that there's a sexual motive at all? Were any of these victims sexually abused or had sexual contact with the person?
Yeah, I don't know that with certainty, but again, that's something that we're obviously exploring. Chief, do you want to add to the earlier piece?
Just that we are working backwards right now. That's what we have to do. He's in custody now, and so that's what we have to take those steps just to go backwards, right? Because your question was working with the federal government. Sure, they're helping us now. The main thing is that he is in custody, so they are assisting us in that investigation because they have a bigger web for us. So, and to answer your question, then is yes.
Thank you.
It sounds like the victims that you know of now were people missing over a period of weeks or months. Do you have any working theory as to how far back you're going to be looking? Could it be going back years and years, or more recent, or just don't know?
We really don't know. Again, we don't know. That's why we're asking for the public's help. And we're scanning. This has gone out through all of our fusion centers. Do you know of any other missing persons? We're trying to gather as much intel as possible. I mean, Chief said it best. We are working backwards. That's why the major put it out. Do you know? Is there any more information? Please get it to us.
Could you describe, you said the bodies were found in a container in Fairfax County. Could you describe what that container was? And can you give us any background on Robinson that not much is known about?
It was a large plastic container, and like Major O'Carroll described, adjacent to the container where we found the remains of our two victims was a shopping cart.
What about his background?
So probably not remarkable to serial killers going back many years in many other places across the country, a remarkable absence of a criminal history. Remarkable absence. So that's why we're going to need help from family, friends, associates, employers, neighbors, anyone who can shed a little bit of light on Anthony Robinson's profile.
You know what he did for work or anything like that?
I think he was pretty transient. I think he had many jobs over the years. But again, that transient nature has prompted us to figure out where he's been over the last several years. And this, like you said, this could go back. We're going into this wide open, clear-minded, open eyes to see how far back and how many victims he may be responsible for taking their lives.
Is the lead, one last question. With the dating app as a lead, are you able to identify other names that you're going to follow up, and if you could give us a sense of how many that might be?
Yes, absolutely. As I said, we have a lot of work to do. A lot of digital evidence in this case, a lot of search warrants that have and will be written. But let me just give you a time frame. An autopsy is underway today. This case is still active to uncover the two remains in the one container. Has had us busy yesterday and today. It's a tragedy. You see you kind of shaking your head, and I agree. This case has a shake in our head. Why? Because the victims did nothing wrong. Didn't have to happen. But justice will prevail. So we have a lot of work to do, and I do think from the video surveillance that we found, from the digital footprint that has been left by at least one of our victims and the suspect, this case is falling together to hold that offender accountable.
You're releasing some of that video evidence so the public can help in the case?
So we have released the suspect's, the arrestee's photo. And as the chief said, when we did look at his criminal history, when we started doing our workup, it was absent. Actually, the only thing that showed was the 4 charges in Harrisonburg, the 2 murders and the felony disposal of human remains. So we will locate every step that Mr. Robinson took, because he interacted with people. We know he's killed some of them. There might have been some that escaped or ran across him and have information. So we are working backwards. We've added additional team members from Fairfax. This is a multi-jurisdictional case that will likely take us even out of Virginia.
I'm just asking about the video in terms of, is there a video you will release or have released?
No, we're not intending to release the video right now. We're working with the families. We're trying to give them as much information because we're hours into this. It's still in the double digits so we're working with the families. If we find something that gives more light to who Mr. Robinson is, and but we want people to come forward that have run across him. Maybe they work with him. Maybe they met him on a social media type site. Maybe they live down the street. They just ran into him at a grocery store. There are people that have information. We're asking them to help us bring justice to these victims.
If it is just these 4 victims and the 4th victim is the person that you believe it is, over what period of time do you now know that he was operating? At what period of time was this shopping cart killer operating?
Bruce, we're only going back a couple, 2 or 3 months. That's it. And that's what worries us. He didn't suddenly turn into who he is 3 months ago. So that's why we're painstakingly going through his whereabouts, his relationships, his employment history, to figure out if, in fact, there are other victims. And like Major O'Carroll said, he may have had interactions with women that he's met on these dating sites who have, for whatever reason, know something about him. It didn't go that far, obviously, with them, but no doubt in my mind that these are not the only 4 women at least 3, maybe 4 that he's made contact with through his dating sites. There are others. We need to do our best to identify them. So,
Has Fairfax County filed any charges yet?
We have not, but charges are forthcoming.
Guys, we'll do 2 more questions.
Quick question about the TikTok threats that's been going around. I know it's a side note, but do you believe that any of the threats to public schools in Fairfax County, are there credibility to any of those? And are Fairfax County Police moving around the school districts today?
well, yeah, I'll say, first and foremost, we have a premier school resource officer program. Our SROs are part of a nationally renowned SRO program. So we're aware of all those bits of information that come in, and we act upon them swiftly and judiciously. So it's something we always take very seriously, and we're taking it very seriously this time.
Thank you.
Just for each of the victims that you know, were all of them introduced to him through the dating app? Is that how he?
We believe that the 3 are. Obviously, we don't have a confirmed identity on the 4th one, so I can't speak to her. But again, the commonality is, how do they meet? Dating sites. How are they killed? Trauma to the body. How are they transported to their final resting place? The shopping cart, hence shopping cart killer. And I don't want to give this guy a cape, but that's who he is. He's a killer. He's a serial killer. We know who he is. Thank God he's behind bars right now. But that still doesn't take away from the urgency that exists to identify any other victims that might be out here, literally beyond the Commonwealth of Virginia and up the East Coast. Thank you.
Thank you.